Good afternoon. Welcome to the 270 by 2024 virtual conference on national popular vote, hosted by Common Cause, Fair Vote, the League of Women Voters, Equal Citizens, and National Popular Vote. I'm Eileen Ravey. I serve as the Grassroots Director for National Popular Vote and will be moderating today's webinar. Today, we're going to discuss what National Popular Vote is, why it is a critical reform, lessons learned from the recent successful Colorado ballot measure, the possibilities for enactment by state legislatures, and the initiative process, and how a bipartisan coalition can and will create a path to getting states with 270 electoral votes to pass the compact in time for the 2024 presidential election. Please use the Q&A button to ask any questions. We do have a very full program with many speakers, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Senator Rebecca Warren is currently finishing 14 years of service in the Michigan House and Senate, where she championed, among many things, the passage of the Great Lakes Interstate Compact, and in 2018, she coordinated the bipartisan introduction of the NPV bill that included 25 of the 38 Michigan senators, 15 Republicans, and 10 Democrats. She has recently been meeting extensively with legislators in Pennsylvania and North Carolina, two of the many states that National Popular Vote has been lobbying throughout 2020. Thanks for joining us, Rebecca.
Thank you. And I'd like to start today's program by doing what I typically do when meeting with state legislators, namely by explaining the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact and answering the questions that that legislator may have. The National Popular Vote bill will guarantee the presidency to the candidate who receives the most popular votes in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. Since 2006, the National Popular Vote bill has been enacted by 15 states and the District of Columbia, together possessing 196 electoral votes, including 4 small states, Delaware, Hawaii, Rhode Island, and Vermont, 8 medium-sized states, Colorado, Connecticut, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New Mexico, Oregon, and Washington, and 3 big states, California, Illinois, and New York. The bill will take effect when enacted by states with 270 electoral votes, 74 more than we have today. I and others today will be discussing different states that may pass the compact between now and 2024, either by action of their state legislatures or through the initiative petitioning process. The bill has been introduced in all of the 34 states that have yet to enact it. Of special interest are the 9 states possessing 88 electoral votes where the bill has been passed by at least one legislative chamber: Arizona, Arkansas, Maine, my home state of Michigan, Minnesota, North Carolina, Nevada, Oklahoma, and Virginia. I'm typically accompanied by National Popular Vote's in-state lobbyists when I meet with legislators. We start our presentation with the U.S. Constitution, which states, each state shall appoint in a manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors. After the compact is passed by states with the majority of the electoral votes, or 270, enough to elect an American president, and comes into effect, all of the electoral votes of the participating states will be awarded to the presidential candidate supported by the most voters in all 50 states and the District of Columbia, and will thereby win a majority of the presidential electors in the Electoral College, at least 270, and therefore become the president. A typical meeting is usually about an hour and involves answering the legislators' questions and concerns about the legislation. Others of our speakers today will cover some of the most frequently asked questions that we get.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Next, we're going to hear from several of our national coalition partners. These partners have played a critical role in our success over the past 14 years, and we are always eager to grow our coalition across the country. If your organization wants to join the coalition advocating for this bill in your state, please reach out. Next up, we have Pam Wilmot. She's the Vice President of State Operations at Common Cause. She virtually single-handedly passed the National Popular Vote bill in Massachusetts and has visited 18 states over the years to help pass National Popular Vote. Common Cause has been with us since the beginning, participating in the very first press conference in 2006 when the National Popular Vote bill was announced.
Thanks, Eileen. Just for those of you that don't know, Common Cause is a national nonpartisan organization that advocates for open and accountable government and free and fair elections. We have 1.5 million members and activists nationwide and have 26 separate state organizations as well as volunteers in all 50. Common Cause believes that every vote should count and count equally, and that a democracy works best when all participate. So that's why we're so enthusiastic about the National Popular Vote Compact and have been participating from the very beginning. Common Cause played a key role in passing National Popular Vote in Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Delaware, New York, California, Colorado, New Mexico, and Oregon. And continues to be a key coalition member in Florida, Maine, New Hampshire, Minnesota, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina. And of course, we are eager to work and do work in many other states. We do this by engaging our members and other coalition allies, engaging the general public through activities such as phone banking, hosting lobby days, providing expert testimony, turning out members for legislative and other events, meeting with legislators, and engaging in social and earned media, and much more. I've been asked to talk about two key problems with the current system that National Popular Vote would fix. And that's the issue of it electing the second place candidate as president and its function in depressing voter turnout. So 5 out of our 45 presidents have come into office without getting the most popular votes nationwide. They have done this by winning a couple of states by very small margins and thus getting all the electoral votes from that state. And that's because of the winners take all state laws. The 2016 election illustrates how this happened under the current state-by-state winner-take-all method. So in 2016, Trump won the Michigan by 11,000 votes, Wisconsin by 23,000 votes, and Pennsylvania by 44,000 votes. And therefore, under the winner-take-all rule, he got all of those states' electoral college votes. Those 3 states alone gave him a majority in the electoral college, even though Hillary Clinton won the national popular vote by 2.8 million votes. When you do the math, that means that each of the 78,000 votes in those 3 states was 36 times more important than the 2.8 million votes cast in all the other states. Similarly, in 2000, although we could look at the other votes too, George Bush became president though Al Gore won the national popular vote by 537,000 votes. Bush won because he carried Florida by only 537 votes. Each of these 537 votes was 1,000 times more important than the 179 votes cast in other states. So by exerting a small amount of leverage, you get this huge bonus with the winner-take-all current system. Near misses are also common under the current system. In the presidential election this year, preliminary numbers, we're not at the final totals yet, show that a switch of 5,495 voters in Arizona, 7,087 in Georgia, and 10,274 in Wisconsin would have defeated Joe Biden, despite Biden's national lead of over 5.3 million votes, which should increase over time as well. Each of these 22,286 votes were 200 and 34 times more important than the 5.3 million votes nationwide. And similarly, in 2004, a switch of just 59,000 votes in Ohio would have given John Kerry a majority in the Electoral College. That's a single state, despite George Bush being ahead nationwide by over 3 million votes. In fact, in the past 6 presidential elections, the current system has produced 2 second-place presidents and 2 very near misses. We're in an era of very close elections, and these kinds of near misses or out and out reversal of the popular vote will happen many, many more times until we turn the system over to a national popular vote. The other issue is that the current system depresses voter participation. Voter turnout was 11% higher in 2016 and 16% higher in 2012 in those closely divided presidential battleground states as compared to the rest of the country. And that makes sense because that's where the campaigns are. For reasons of lowered voter turnout in spectator states is that many voters realize their vote doesn't really matter in the presidential race, and also because there's no campaign there. We typically also see a drop-off if a state moves from the competitive column to the spectator column. And we'll hear a little bit more about this next.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions so far. We already have a few dozen that have come in, so please do know that members of our team are working to answer those in the chat, so you'll be able to see those on the Q&A function. Next up, we have Rob Ritchie, the CEO of Fair Vote. Rob is the co-author of the book Every Vote Equal, a state-based plan for electing the president by national popular vote. And he helped draft the National Popular Vote Compact. Fair Vote has done extensive study of presidential elections and researching recounts as well as campaign events in presidential elections. Rob and Ryan O'Donnell single-handedly got the national popular vote passed in the first state in Maryland, where the bill was sponsored by now Congress member and constitutional law professor Jamie Raskin. Thanks for joining us, Rob.
Thanks, Eileen. Terrific to be part of this gathering. The goal of having the presidential elections where every vote matters equally in every election is one of the great causes of our time. The field of play for presidential elections leaves most Americans looking on the outside in, as I assume most of the people on this call experience. Most states have had not even had a single campaign event with a major party presidential candidate in the general election in 20 years, much less been considered a swing state. The reason is simple. Under current laws, almost all states award all of their electoral votes to the candidate who gets the most votes inside the state. Because of such winner-take-all laws, candidates have no reason to pay attention to voters unless they live in a state where the race is within a few percentage points. Consider that in the 2020 general election, 12 states received 96% of the 212 general election campaign events by the major party presidential and vice presidential candidates. 33 states and DC did not receive a single general election campaign event at all. 3/8 of events were showered on just 2 states, and familiar ones at that, Pennsylvania and Florida. The situation was similar in 2016 when 94% of the general election campaign events were in a dozen states. In 2012, 100% of the events were in a dozen states. In 2008, 94% of the events were in a dozen states. Changes in which states are in this favored group come only at the margins. More than half of states have been ignored in every election, including nearly every single small state. Fair Vote also has looked at the issue of recounts, which may be on people's minds right now with Georgia and discussion of other recounts. And opponents try to use this as an argument against the compact. The reality is the current system is the one that creates potential electoral crises out of comfortable wins. The Georgia hand-tallied recount this week underscores a key finding in our research of all the statewide recounts in the nation since 2000, namely that recounts almost never change statewide outcomes. Only 3 out of nearly 6,000 statewide races in 20 years, and typically change less than 0.03% of the vote. And the bigger the pool of the voters, the biggest of all being a national popular vote, the less likely a recount is to affect. Finally, Fair Vote is known by many as the leading national voice for ranked choice voting. I know this topic has come up in chat and something we care deeply about. It's a method of voting that gives you the option to rank candidates in order of preference. If your first choice can't win, your vote is instantly counted for your second choice. And this resolves the spoiler controversy and avoids partisans weaponizing third parties to try to change outcomes. Ranked choice voting this year was passed into law by voters in Alaska, with that just being confirmed this week, for its upcoming state and federal elections, and it will join Maine in using this system for presidential elections. It also passed in all 6 cities this year where it was on the ballot and was used in the biggest elections held this year in Maine and 10 cities, and by the state Republican parties for key elections at their state conventions in 3 states, and by 4 state Democratic parties in their presidential primaries. So it's an idea that's growing, and some people wonder if the compact negates ranked choice voting for president. I see the 2 proposals instead as an excellent complement to one another. As more states move to ranked choice voting, which I believe is inevitable, I anticipate states with RCV for presidential elections to establish a compact of their own to make it work in concert with the compact. Until then, there are straightforward ways for ranked choice voting states to accommodate the compact. This is one of those eras in American politics where I believe big changes are coming. Winning the National Popular Vote Compact is one of them, and let's just get it done.
Thank you, Rob. Ted Trimpa is the president of Trimpa Group and has presented National Popular Vote in his home state of Colorado and also represented us at the national level. Ted has visited 15 states on behalf of National Popular Vote. Thank you so much for joining us, Ted.
Oh, thanks, Eileen. So by way of background, the National Popular Vote bill was signed by the Colorado legislature and was passed by the legislature and signed by the Colorado governor in early 2019. But because this law was signed at the same time that the legislature was considering a red flag gun control bill, a sex education bill, and an oil and gas bill, it became a lightning rod for controversy because they were worried about the agenda of the new governor and the new legislature. So the opponents filed a referendum petition, thereby requiring a statewide vote to determine whether the people were going to affirm the action of the legislature. And this is the first time that has happened since 1932. Under Colorado law, a voter has to vote yes in order to affirm what the legislature passed. And as we know, many of us in politics, getting a yes vote is much more difficult than getting a no vote, because no votes happen typically when people have just seen some minor concerns raised. Running the Yes on National Popular Vote campaign in Colorado involved starting up a $5 million business, and in a hurry. The campaign involved general consultant Hilltop Strategies, the Magnus Pearson creative team for advertising, Blue West Media for placement of advertising, the Authentic Strategies digital team, and the Global Strategy Group for conducting numerous polls and focus groups. Communications was handled by Senator Michael Foote, the Senate sponsor of the bill. Former Representative Joe McCloskey handled relations with legislators and public officials. The legal effort was guided by Mark Gruskin, who is co-author of our book, Every Vote Equal, a state-based plan for electing the president by national popular vote. And he also helped draft the compact. Sylvia Bernstein handled grassroots organizing and hundreds of meetings across the state. The League of Women Voters and Mi Familia Vota provided advertising support, and even conservatives for Yes on National Popular Vote ran a separate and supporting TV, social media, and ground campaign. And finally, libertarians for Yes on National Popular Vote ran a supporting campaign as well. The campaign was successful by winning urban, suburban, and even some rural counties. We picked up some areas of the state that we were a little surprised, given that we thought the opposition would be dominating in those areas. And finally, a key component was ensuring that former governors, US senators, other electeds, statewide electeds were giving us positive statements and support. And of course, we always appreciated the support of our current governor. And so with that, I'll turn it back to Eileen.
Thanks, Ted. Pat Rosenthal is president of Ainsley Shea Public Relations and has been a senior advisor to National Popular Vote since 2007. He has worked in 30 states on behalf of National Popular Vote, including most recently on the statewide referendum in Colorado, where national popular vote won by over 146,000 votes. Thanks, Rosie.
Well, thanks, Eileen. I think the best place for me to contribute is on the topic of message discipline. Experience has taught me over the years that movements that stay on message achieve their objectives, and those that don't fail to achieve them. Ted, in his talk, pointed to a couple of important things in that talk related to Colorado. The need to win was critical, and I think both he and I and others felt like the ballot measure was close to a bet the company event. A big part of what we did was message testing with research and working with the consulting team to leverage 100% of our resources behind winning messages through every communication channel available. Things like ads, editorial pages, speaker bureaus, radio, digital, and television. The research that we did pointed us to three core values in that campaign. One was this idea that the principle of one person, one vote is critical to the future of American democracy, and that national popular vote advanced that principle in presidential elections. The second thing the voters or the research pointed us to was this idea that every vote should be equal in presidential elections, and the presidency should always be guaranteed to the candidate who wins the national popular vote. That was a winning message for us there. The third thing that popped was this idea that candidates should have incentives to campaign in all 50 states when they seek the presidency, that they should not just be able to focus on battleground state voters, and that was an issue of fairness. Now, if you agreed with these three statements, you were going to support the national popular vote, and you were going to vote yes on Proposition 113. And if we had enough weight behind these three messages, we believed we would win, simply because more voters in Colorado agreed with us and our message than agreed with our opponents. And I just want to show you for a minute, real quick, how the message played out in our TV ads. So Scott, if you could play the first ad, I'd be grateful.
Living in a democracy should mean one person, one vote, and that every vote counts. But our outdated system of electing the president doesn't work that way. The Denver Post says vote yes on the national popular vote, saying this is a matter of preserving the sanctity of votes across the nation. Voting yes ensures every voter is counted equally, and the candidate who gets the most votes becomes president. Make your vote count. Vote yes on Prop 113, the national popular vote.
Hello, Wisconsin. Well, hello, Pennsylvania.
I am so glad to be back in Michigan.
Great to be back in Florida. I love Florida.
Notice any place missing? Actually, almost every place is missing because presidential candidates ignore all but a few states, including Colorado. The national popular vote will make every vote count equally, and candidates will have to pay attention to voters in all 50 states. Vote yes on Prop 113, the national popular vote.
So you'll see, if you saw those two ads 20 times over the course of 4 weeks, you would have had pretty much the experience that the voters in Colorado had. And if you agreed with the idea that the principle of one person, one vote is foundational to American democracy, and that the candidates with the most votes should win, and that we should force the candidates to campaign to all 50 states, you would have known to vote yes on Proposition 113. And that's what I mean when I talk about message discipline. And I think it's a very important part of how we won the campaign. We didn't waste a single resource. We drove them all behind those poll tested messages. Now, if you fast forward today, what's the message of the current cycle for the national popular vote? Since Election Day, my phone's been burning up as the media contact for national popular vote for obvious reasons. The message we're trying to drive today is that we just had another presidential election, right? Where 3 out of 4 voters were mere spectators. As Rob pointed out earlier, 33 states were completely ignored in the last presidential election. We also don't have to do anything other than turn on our TV to figure out that the current system produces chaotic results. It leads to endless litigation, unneeded recounts, networks calling the race, and courts deciding the outcome, and that is not in the best interest of American democracy. So we must continue, and we do continue to indict the current system, okay? But then we pivot into our solution, right? which is we say it doesn't have to be this way. We can advance the principle of one person, one vote by having a national popular vote for president in 2024. We also point out that we're doing it in a bipartisan way. In fact, I'm a Republican from Minnesota. I helped confirm Alito and Roberts to the Supreme Court of the United States, and I helped George W. Bush enact his domestic policy agenda. The reason I'm a proponent for national popular vote is because I do not believe that one person, one vote is a Democrat or a Republican idea. I believe it's a uniquely American idea and that we need to advance that principle. And I also think an important message, and if I get one thing across today, it's that the only way we are going to have a national popular vote for president in 2024 is if we get behind the plan at nationalpopularvote.com. So my call to action in every interview I do is go to nationalpopularvote.com. Get smart, get educated. If you want a national popular vote for president, get on board and join us today. And I think that's a very simple message if we all stay on it. I want to say one last thing. Many advocates for the national popular vote talk about abolishing the Electoral College. And I think there's a lot of supporters of national popular vote that would like to abolish the Electoral College. I just want to express that that creates headwinds in a lot of ways as it relates to having a national popular vote for president. It actually doesn't voice support for our proposal, okay? Our proposal does not get rid of the Electoral College, nor do we need to have a national popular vote for president. So if I could ask one thing, I'd like to see us all share a language. Our focus should be on achieving a national popular vote for president by 2024. We need to be clear there is only one way to get that done. It is the National Popular Vote Plan, and I hope you'll all advocate for it by writing your legislator, penning an op-ed or a letter to the editor, donating or volunteering to our campaign, or frankly, all of the above. But my sincere hope is that we can all be on the same message. And I just want to thank Eileen again for the time, and I want to thank everyone for being here. With your help, we will get this done.
Thanks, Rosie. Sylvia Bernstein and Linda Soroff created the grassroots organization to help pass the bill in the Colorado legislature. When the issue was placed on the ballot, Sylvia took charge of the campaign's grassroots organizing, working closely with the League of Women Voters, and she helped achieve the successful statewide vote on November 3rd. Her work is highlighted in the recent book, Unrig, by Danielle Newman, and she's going to share some history of the League of Women Voters support for this bill across the country as well. Thanks for joining us, Sylvia.
Thanks, Eileen. Yes, I'm very excited to be here representing the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters of Colorado supported the bill's passage through the legislature and was also a key partner in the Yes on National Popular Vote campaign. The state and local leagues focused on educating the public about the bill's benefits through speakers bureaus, interviews, events, and webinars, ultimately hosting about 75% of the campaign's educational events. We wrote over 32,000 postcards to independent women voters in Colorado, and we championed the messaging that this is a nonpartisan reform that benefits all Americans, especially using letters to the editor. Nationally, the League of Women Voters of the US has supported electing the president by a national popular vote since 1970, so for 50 years, and has supported the National Popular Vote Compact since 2010. The League of Women Voters US believes that a popular vote for president is essential to representative government, and the League of Women Voters is proud to be a part of the fight to ensure that every vote matters when electing the president. The League of Women Voters supported the bill's passage in Washington, D.C., Vermont, California, Rhode Island, New York, Connecticut, Colorado, Delaware, New Mexico, and Oregon through testimony, letter campaigns, public meetings, and lobbying of legislators and key stakeholders. The League of Women Voters currently has members that are actively supporting the efforts in Arizona, Florida, Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, Nevada, Virginia, and Wisconsin, and has established a national task force to support local affiliates in their advocacy for the national popular vote. The League of Women Voters looks forward to continuing to grow our advocacy work on this issue and work alongside of the National Popular Vote organization to pass this bill in all future states where our members will help lead the charge for the fight for one person, one vote.
Thank you, Sylvia. Next up, we have Barry Fathom. Barry has practiced initiative law since 1979 and has been part of over 100 initiative campaigns in 25 states. He is co-author of the book, Every Vote Equal, a state-based plan for electing the president by national popular vote, helped draft the National Popular Vote Compact, and serves as National Popular Vote's president. He has visited 22 states for National Popular Vote. Welcome, Barry.
Thanks, Eileen, and greetings to all of our viewers. So the initiative process is complicated. There are a lot of factors that you have to look at to determine, first of all, is it a good idea to do an initiative in a state, and even more importantly, in a particular year. So let's define the universe of initiative states. So there are 17 states today, wrong slide. There are 17 states with the initiative process that have not passed national popular vote. So let me read those off so everyone knows the 17 targets potentially. Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, Florida, Maine, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Utah, and Wyoming. Now, 8 of those 17 states, it's worth putting a little note next to, we've had significant bipartisan support in 8 of those 17 states. So let me just tell you what those are. Michigan, Arizona, Nevada, Maine, Oklahoma, Missouri, Ohio, and Nebraska are states that we've had significant bipartisan support in up to date. Now, circulating the petition itself is very expensive and very complicated under a variety of state laws. And unfortunately, it's gotten substantially more difficult as a result of litigation and some statutes that have been passed in some states. So in Arizona right now, it's estimated that the cost of qualifying a petition, just the petition itself, would be between $3 and $4 million. That's not the campaign, that's just to get it on the ballot. 8 of the 17 states that I named earlier also permit referral by the legislature. So that would be another way of national popular vote getting onto a ballot. So there is still a significant legal question as to whether or not the initiative process can be utilized in connection with presidential elections. The key to all this is the use of the word legislature in Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution. That issue is still not resolved, but we expect it will be resolved by the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, while there's no systemic advantage to the current system, many voters think there is. So one of the critical questions coming out of this election will be, how do voters feel about the current system? How do Republican voters feel coming out of the 2020 election? So we really don't know right now how voters are going to react to the 2020 election and how that might affect the ability to do initiatives. Now, campaigns for initiatives are very expensive. I'm going to give 3 examples. In Michigan, 2018, a really tremendous grassroots group, voters not politicians, successfully put an initiative on the ballot and won the election. They spent $16 million, but the other side only spent $400,000. So if that had been a more contested election, 2 things would have happened. More money would have been needed, and perhaps it may not have passed if the opposition had really spent a lot of money. There's a chart that's being put up. This is 2018 as well. Let me just cite 2 examples. Nevada Energy Initiative, total spent by both sides, $100 million. And in Arizona, another energy measure, Both sides spent a total of $65 million. So, in conclusion, there are two criteria that have to be met in order to proceed with an initiative. First, you have to know you can win it, because a loss at the ballot box for national popular vote could cause irreparable damage. So how do we know we win? Well, the research will tell us that. So variable number one is we can't put an initial on the ballot unless we're sure of winning. The second most important variable is you have to have the money. If we don't have the money to conduct a vigorous campaign, then we don't belong on the ballot. And we cannot qualify a measure for the ballot without knowing that we have the resources to run a vigorous campaign. So ballot initiatives and legislative referrals are two tools in the National Popular Vote toolbox, and time will tell as to exactly what role initiatives and legislative referrals will play in our road to 270 by 2024. Thanks, Eileen.
Thanks, Barry. And thank you to everyone that's submitting questions so far. We're seeing them come in, and just please know if you've submitted a question and you think it's a really important one, it's very likely that we're going to get to it shortly with some of our upcoming speakers. So just do know that we're keeping an eye on those. So next up, we have Scott Drexel. Scott has been with the National Popular Vote since 2009. He's met with state legislators in 29 states, well over 100 members of Congress, and numerous national organizations on behalf of National Popular Vote. He was responsible for raising the lion's share of the funds for the Yes on National Popular Vote campaign in Colorado. He has recently been meeting with legislators in Minnesota, Maine, and Virginia, where the bill has passed one House in each state in the last 2 years.
All right, thank you, Eileen. Firstly, I'd like to thank the many volunteers who dedicated their time and energy to make the Yes on National Popular Vote campaign in Colorado in 2020 a success. I'd also like to thank the nearly 9,000 individual donors who contributed a total of $5.4 million, which enabled us to bring the National Popular Vote message to voters for the very first time. As you may have heard some of my colleagues mention previously, since its inception in 2006, National Popular Vote has been enacted into law in 15 states and the District of Columbia. Together, those 16 jurisdictions account for 196 electoral votes, which leaves us just 74 electoral votes shy of the 270 needed for full implementation. There are multiple avenues that can be used to reach that threshold, and we're confident that there's a strong opportunity to do so in time for the 2024 election. As you can see from the graphic on your screen, there are 9 states that have yet to enact National Popular Vote, but have passed NPV through at least one of their 2 legislative chambers. Together, they represent 88 electoral votes. They include Virginia and Minnesota, where National Popular Vote was passed by the lower chambers in each in 2020. Excuse me, Maine, where National Popular Vote was approved by the Senate in 2019. Nevada, where National Popular Vote was approved by the legislature in 2019, Arizona and Oklahoma, where National Popular Vote was passed by Republican-led chambers in 2016, as well as Arkansas, North Carolina, and Michigan. All of these remain strong possibilities for legislative enactments, with Virginia, Maine, and Michigan representing the most encouraging scenarios for the 2021-2022 legislative session. Support among legislators for National Popular Vote is particularly notable in Michigan, where in 2018, so post-2016, the bill was sponsored by a bipartisan group of 25 of the 38 members of the Michigan Senate, including a majority, 15 of the Republican caucus. Additionally, 5 of the states in which National Popular Vote has passed at least one legislative chamber, specifically Michigan, Arizona, Nevada, Maine, and Oklahoma, also permit voters to enact legislation through the initiative process. This is also the case in Missouri, Ohio, and Nebraska, and our team is currently evaluating the feasibility of mounting initiative campaigns in each. Together, those states represent 77 electoral votes between them. Finally, the 2022 midterm elections have the potential to open new possibilities for enactments around the country. Full legislatures in a number of states will be up for election for the very first time under new legislative maps, including in states like Pennsylvania, Florida, and Utah, where National Popular Vote has already built strong volunteer networks, grassroots coalitions, and bipartisan legislative support. It's also worth noting that national popular vote has been passed by unanimously by Republican-controlled committees in both Georgia and Missouri. Beyond the states that I've mentioned, our bill has legislative sponsors in every state that hasn't passed national popular vote already. New opportunities to advance legislation typically surface after each presidential election as the overall political atmosphere changes. 2020 is proving to be another election that causes voters and policymakers to reevaluate the current system. In the end, some combination of legislative enactments and initiatives will likely present our most expedient path to reaching 270 electoral votes in time for the 2024 election. Our successful effort in Colorado in 2020 gives us a great deal of confidence in taking our issue directly to the voters. But as Barry mentioned previously, initiative campaigns are incredibly resource intensive. So our ultimate success is going to rely heavily on the ongoing support, both volunteer and financial, from national popular vote advocates like you. So thank you very much. Eileen?
Thanks, Scott. Ray Haynes served 8 years in both the California State Assembly and Senate, including as the Senate Republican Whip. He has served as national chairman of the American Legislative Exchange Council, and Ray has visited 30 states on behalf of National Popular Vote. Thanks for joining us today, Ray.
Well, thank you, Eileen, and I appreciate the chance to talk with you, and I also appreciate the opportunity to talk with each of the folks that are listening to us today. I want to start by saying why I support the National Popular Vote Compact as a Republican, and I support it because it forces candidates to campaign for every single vote in every single state. Today, the focus of presidential campaigns is on a narrow slice of voters in small regions of battleground states, which in my opinion produces bad public policy and warped political strategy. Part of the work I do on behalf of the compact is to talk with Republican state legislators in every state to show them how the compact is consistent with the intent of the framers of the Constitution and better for the long-term interests of the country, and in my case, the Republican Party. The 50-state campaign, I believe, would unite our country and strengthen the Republican Party, and that's why I believe Republicans should support it. Most Republican legislators, however, start out real skeptical. First, they're concerned with the intent of the framers. They all think that the winner-take-all laws that are in effect in 48 of the 50 states are part of the Constitution, or they say they're concerned about moving to a national popular vote because it will make the US a democracy rather than a republic. Part of my message is defining the intent of the framers first, and then talking about the nature of a democracy as defined by James Madison. Next, they're concerned that big cities or big states will take control of the election. And of course, they think these states and cities are hostile to the Republicans. I walk them through the demographics to show how these beliefs are simply not supported by the facts. What I've found, and I think part of the message that I'd like to get across today, is that talking about the defects of the Electoral College, talking about abolishing the Electoral College, or federal rather than state control of elections with Republicans is counterproductive. Emphasizing the defects of the winner-take-all laws, however, and how those laws warp the Electoral College is the appropriate way to deal with the issue of this change the compact proposes when talking to Republicans. Look, the national popular vote has received considerable support from Republican legislators across the country. It passed the Republican-controlled Arizona House in 2016 with 2/3 of the Republicans and 2/3 of the Democrats sponsoring the bill. It passed the Republican-controlled Oklahoma Senate and twice passed the Republican-controlled New York State Senate with the endorsement of the Conservative Party of New York. It was passed unanimously by committees in the Republican-controlled Georgia and Missouri legislatures. It was also sponsored by 25 of the 38 Michigan senators, a majority of both parties in that body. In addition, Republicans have provided the key votes to ensure passage of the compact in Oregon, New Jersey, Connecticut, Delaware, and New York. So I want to kind of leave you with this thought. To get to 270 by 2024, and therefore a popular vote for president, we must necessarily achieve the support of Republican-controlled legislatures and Republicans in general. The most important way for this group, the group listening today, to be helpful is to focus on the bipartisan nature of the compact when communicating with legislators, and particularly communicating with Republican legislators. Again, thank you, Eileen, and thank you all for taking the time to listen to me.
Thanks, Ray. Saul Anusis is the former chairman of the Michigan Republican Party, member of the Republican National Committee, and twice was a candidate for chairman of the Republican National Committee. He has worked with Newt Gingrich at American Solutions and on Jack Kemp's presidential campaign, and as a senior advisor to the Ted Cruz for President campaign in the 2016 cycle. He has visited 23 states on behalf of National Popular Vote. And thanks for joining us today, Saul.
Well, thanks, Eileen. Look, first, I got involved in this when I was chairman of the Michigan Republican Party. In 2008, Michigan was a battleground state. And then suddenly on October 19th, we weren't. As the McCain campaign pulled out of Michigan and Republican candidates down ticket were devastated that year in the election. In general, I was frustrated that certain states are battleground states and important during presidential elections, while others are not. Primarily because 3 out of 4 Americans live in states that are either decidedly Republican or decidedly Democratic, and therefore don't matter much in presidential elections. Therefore, what happens for all practical purposes is that we elect the president of the battleground states of America versus the president of the United States of America. Next, most Republicans believe we're a center-right nation, and I would argue that most Democrats believe we're a center-left nation. The beauty of the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is that it is quintessentially fair, because most Americans are very comfortable with the fact that the person who gets the most votes should win. And I'm more than willing to have our candidates take our ideas on our message to the American people and let the best man and or woman win the presidential election. The other issue I have to address fairly commonly with Republicans is the perception that large states and large cities would dominate presidential elections. First, I point out the fact that the 100 largest cities in America only make up about 19% of the national popular vote. And then I add, if you look at New York and California, they only vote about 60% Democrat and another 40% Republican, and therefore would not be electing the president of the United States under a National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. I normally end my presentation with a very simple statement that I want every voter in every state to be politically relevant in every election. If we as Republicans can't make our case to the American people, then we don't deserve to win. Under a national popular vote, we would run a very different campaign than we do today, similar to gubernatorial races in competitive states that would force us to campaign in all 50 states and appeal to a much broader coalition across the country. So that's basically my pitch to Republicans and conservatives. And that's how we present it around the country. So with that, I'll throw it back to you, Eileen.
Thank you, Saul. Next up, we have Senator Chris Pearson. Senator Pearson is starting his 3rd term in the Vermont Senate after serving 5 terms in the Vermont House. While at Fair Vote in 2005, he helped research and develop the National Popular Vote Compact. He has worked in dozens of states on behalf of National Popular Vote, most recently in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Michigan, Maine, and New Hampshire. Senator Pearson?
Thanks, Eileen. I appreciate the chance to be here, and it's great to see so many people interested in our topic. When I talk to legislators across the country, I'm always amazed at how pervasive the myth is that small states benefit in the current system. In fact, small states do not have disproportionate influence in picking the president. We have virtually no influence. As we joked when we enacted this bill in Vermont, we have just as much influence as a New York voter, 0. In fact, during the debate, somebody said, "We will lose our influence." And the response was, "How could we have any less influence?" Look at the history. There were 952 general election campaign events during the 2008, 12, and 16 campaigns, but only one of these occurred in the 8 smallest states. 7 of those 8 smallest states, were totally ignored. DC received 1 event in 2008, which signals how the candidates are thinking about those small states. Plus, the population of the 8 smallest states is 5.9 million. slightly bigger than the population of Wisconsin, which has 5.6 million people. Because of the bonus 2 electoral votes that every state receives, the 8 smallest states have 24 electoral votes, compared to only 10 for Wisconsin. But Wisconsin received 40 campaign events in these 3 elections, 40 times more, even though the smallest states have over twice the electoral votes. Presidential candidates ignore the smallest states for the same reason they ignore most states, because they're comfortably red or comfortably blue. Under the current state winner-take-all method of awarding electoral votes, political power and attention comes from being a closely divided state, not from a state's number of electors. Wisconsin's 10 electoral votes attracts 40 times more attention than the 24 electoral votes of the 8 smallest states. Plus, contrary to the myth, the 13 smallest states, that's all of them with 3 or 4 electors, are not predominantly Republican in presidential elections. In fact, they're basically tied. They've split 7 or 8 in favor of the Democrat in all but 1 election since 1992. And despite what you may have heard about Trump, he did not win in 2016 because of small states. All of those 13 smallest states were won by the same party in every election since 2004. Even if we consider the 25 smallest states, Iowa was the only one to switch parties between 2012 and 2016. And Iowa's 6 electors weren't enough to elect Trump. In total, 4 states plus the District of Columbia have enacted the National Popular Vote Compact. So legislators there are well aware that the winner-take-all system isn't a benefit for them. Under a popular vote, candidates will look to increase their vote totals in every state, and small states will finally get to play a role in the campaigns. Back to you, Eileen. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Pearson. Can I actually ask you to stay on for just a moment? We have a number of questions that have come in asking about if a state can withdraw from the interstate compact. Can you speak to that question for a moment, please?
Sure. They can withdraw just the same way that they pass our bill. They can pass a bill to undo the bill. But there's an important caveat here. When a state passes national popular vote, they are agreeing to the terms of the contract. And like most interstate compacts, there is a withdrawal clause. So the withdrawal clause in our bill says that the withdrawal will not take effect during the last 6 months of a presidential term. So that covers July 20th to January 20th. This is the important period between the conventions, when we know who the candidates are, through the election, through all the polling and all the torture of who's going to win, through the meeting of the electors and into the inauguration. So in other words, a state could decide, no, this isn't what we want to do. We want to go back to winner take all or the district system, but they can't make that change in the middle of a campaign. That would violate the contract that states are entering into with the national popular vote when they enact national popular vote. By the way, those withdrawal clauses have been upheld in other interstate compact court challenges, and we're quite confident that it makes all the sense in the world, because when one state passes our bill, they need to know that the other states are going to play by the same rules. That's why it's a contract. That's why it's actually created as an interstate compact.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So next up, we have Professor Lawrence Lessig. Professor Lessig is the Roy L. Furman Professor of Law at Harvard Law School and the former director of the Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics at Harvard University. He founded Equal Citizens, which, among other things, has been advancing lawsuits aimed at getting state winner-take-all laws declared unconstitutional. Professor Lessig, thank you so much for joining us today.
So I've been asked to talk about the effect of the Supreme Court's recent decision in the so-called faithless elector case, the Cefalo versus Washington decision, and what that decision might say about the constitutionality of the National Popular Vote Compact. And our view is that the Cefalo decision strongly reinforces the argument in favor of the constitutionality of the National Popular Vote Compact. So Cefalo addressed the question of whether electors have a constitutional discretion to vote as they wish, regardless of a state law that might direct them to vote in accordance with how the people in the state have voted. And the originalist argument in that case had been quite strong. Indeed, some of the strongest constitutional originalists filed amicus briefs saying it was absolutely clear that the framers of our Constitution imagined electors to be constitutionally free and couldn't be constrained by state legislatures in casting their vote. And they asked the court in the briefs they filed to uphold that original understanding by recognizing the discretion of electors. But the Supreme Court, ultimately with 9 justices joining the conclusion, declined that invitation. Justice Kagan's opinion essentially said, whatever the assumptions were originally, democracy has overcome those presumptions, and that a state therefore has the power to direct how electors may vote, at least if the state is directing those electors to vote in accordance with the will of the people. As Justice Kagan put it at the end of her opinion, here we the people rule. Now, we believe this holding obviously supports the architecture of the National Popular Vote Compact. First, states can bind electors to vote as the state directs. That's at least if they direct in accordance with how we the people vote. Second, while the court could have identified principles that might compete and overwhelm the state's interest in selecting the manner by which electors are selected, it didn't. The power the court recognized is the state legislature's power, so long as it's consistent with democracy. Conservatives and liberal justices alike recognize the power of that state legislature as trumping anything else. And finally, this special power, the court importantly tied to the ideals of democracy. Cefalo critically constrained the electors in the name of democracy. We believe that same principle constrains legislatures in the name of democracy. So while a legislature can constrain electors to a democratic result, I don't believe a legislature could constrain electors against a democratic result. So it's for that reason, I don't believe, for example, that the efforts of some today to imagine a legislature picking a slate of electors against the vote of the people would be consistent with the decision in Cefalo. Now, of course, none of this means, and no lawyer or especially law professor would predict, that there's no way for the Supreme Court to go against these principles and therefore go against the National Popular Vote Compact. Of course, they could. They could redefine democracy to be a federalist framed conception of democracy, state bound, not nationally bound, and that implicitly constrains the power of state legislatures. They could extend a principle in Bush versus Gore against forbidding a system where essentially different rules are applying in different parts of a jurisdiction. My view is those are very weak arguments. But I think what's clear is that they cannot, consistent with the principles that the court unanimously embraced in Cefalo, find that the National Popular Vote Compact goes against the Constitution as it has come to be interpreted after 200 years of embracing and articulating the ideas of popular democracy. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for joining us. Next up, we have Jason Harrow, the Executive Director of Equal Citizens. He and Professor Lessig argued the 2 cases in the US Supreme Court this year that resulted in a decision sweepingly reaffirming the powers of state legislatures over the method of appointing presidential electors. Thank you so much for joining us, Jason.
Of course, it's great to be here. So I am going to continue on the legal theme that Professor Lessig started. I worked together with him. And I'm also, since we're here at the hour mark, I'm going to try and do a little something different here and do a little presentation. I'll even shrink myself for the audience here. Okay, so the legal question that I want to talk about is, what about Congress? And I want to note the style of the presentation is a shameless ripoff of my boss's Larry Lessig style. He didn't give you a presentation this time, so I'm going to. Okay, so a lot of people want to know about Congress when they ask about the legal questions. Larry talked about whether it might be unconstitutional just as a whole, but there is this issue of whether it needs ratification by Congress. Why would that be? Well, here's the the constitutional language. No state shall, without the consent of Congress, enter into any agreement or compact with another state. So those red phrases, without the consent of Congress and any agreement or compact, lead people to ask, is this an agreement or compact that will need the consent of Congress? Well, one place to look for that answer is the bill. So I went to the National Popular Vote website, nationalpopularvote.com, which everybody should visit all the time. It should be your homepage. And it's called the National Popular Vote Compact Bill. It's an agreement among the states, and Article 1 says that any state and DC may become a member of this agreement. So it looks like the compact might require congressional consent because the Constitution uses the word agreement or compact, and lo, so does the National Popular Vote Compact. Except the Supreme Court, in lawyerly wisdom, says not every compact in normal type is a compact in constitutional type. And in particular, there's this 1893 case called Tennessee versus Virginia. And it turns out that congressional ratification is needed only for the formation of a combination tending to the increase of political power in the states, which may encroach upon or interfere with the just supremacy of the United States. And the reasoning is, of course, not every agreement needs to go to Congress. There's lots of little teeny agreements that have to be immune from congressional ratification. So there's this category of compacts that doesn't need congressional ratification. And under this definition, the NPV compact, normal type, is not really a compact, constitutional type. And that's because it deals only with how states appoint electors, and that's up to the states, and it's not up to the federal government. And it doesn't do anything to infringe on any power of the federal government or any power of any other state, because it's only allocating individual electors that states already have the right to allocate however they wish. So I think people should be encouraged. If Congress doesn't get a hold of this and doesn't go the right way, it's still legal, and we should still have confidence to keep the movement moving forward. That said, it'd be great to get Congress's blessing. And folks are trying, folks on this meeting and elsewhere are working closely with Congress, because at the appropriate time, it really would be great to get Congress's blessing. And one reason to do that is that while we're there, while we're in Congress, we might want to make a few tweaks to the way that electoral votes get counted to make things run more smoothly. People are sort of peeking under the hood in the last couple of weeks of the way the election process for president works in all these stages, the way electors are appointed and ascertained, the dates the Electoral College meets. And without going into too many details, I think the team at National Popular Vote has a great plan for making a few tweaks while we're at Congress to make the National Popular Vote even more secure, even safer, even more reliable, and make the process for secretaries of states and state election officials that much smoother. It can certainly still work, again, legally and practically, without going to Congress at all. I want to emphasize that. But it would be good to pull open the hood and change a couple things. So before I turn back over to Eileen, 3 takeaways that I want the audience to remember from this legal talk. It's not a compact using constitutional type, even though it's called a compact, regular type. So we don't need Congress. Don't lose any sleep over that. But point 2, it would be great to get Congress's blessing, and folks are really trying, and at the appropriate political time, and based on the progress of the composition of the Senate and the House, and the progress in the states of the compact, I think it's a really great idea, and very likely we'll get congressional consent. And takeaway 3 is that while we're there, while we're talking to Congress people, we can make some very minor tweaks to the way elections work, and that will make the compact even stronger and the results even more secure. But I want to emphasize that's not strictly necessary. So, okay, back to regular size, and Eileen, back to you.
Thank you, Jason. And I'm actually going to have Professor Lessig come back on screen here as well. And I wanted to ask the both of you, Can you comment about the possibility of the legislature picking electors? You know, something that we're seeing potentially floated in the media currently today, but can you explain a little bit about that process and the law behind it?
Of course, everybody is focused on the fact, which of course the compact relies on, that state legislatures have a kind of superpower when it comes to electors. They get to pick the electors and they get to say how the electors will vote. But we should also remember that the Constitution also gives Congress the power to say when the electors will be selected. So whatever power the state legislatures have before the day on which electors are to be appointed, that power disappears once that day for appointing electors has passed. There's one very narrow statutory exception that Congress has enacted in 3 U.S.C. 2 that gives the power in a very narrow class of cases when an election has quote unquote failed. The framers of that statute were thinking about, for example, what happened in Georgia with the senatorial races where they have a majority requirement and nobody got a majority. That was the case in New Hampshire, for example, in 1845 when that statute was passed. So that narrow class of cases is covered by the statute, but outside of that narrow class of cases, Congress says that the electors must be picked as of November 3rd, and that's when they had to have been picked. So some alternative slate would be inconsistent with that congressional rule, and we think it would also be inconsistent with Chafalo. You can't pick the electors as a state legislature against the democratic will for the same reason you can't have electors themselves vote against the democratic will. Here, as Kagan put it, we the people rule.
Can I just add one thing too, Eileen, which is that as one great part of the National Popular Vote Compact for solving this problem is that it moves big blocks of electoral votes one way and the other. And so you are unlikely to have really narrow victories in the Electoral College. So this threat will probably dissipate. And of course, the other thing is it's an agreement. It's a contract. So it potentially gives people, other states, the right to sue and enforce the compact if states try to play games. So I want to echo, what Professor Lessig said, which is it's illegal now, and I think people shouldn't be too worried, but it's yet another reason to keep pushing for national popular vote.
Thank you, Jason. And would the two of you agree that once the compact is in effect, the threat also dissipates for a potential faithless elector to overturn the outcome of the election?
It certainly would, for both the reason Jason just mentioned, because automatically 270 electors at least would be with one candidate. But there will be states that are not necessarily part of the compact that are likely to be with that candidate as well. So the majority will be significantly above 270, and faithless electors are pretty small in number. But secondly, of course, Chafalo says states can deal with that problem. I frankly am a little bit disappointed that more states didn't act on that in the interim since Chafalo. But what the party did was to get these electors to pledge to support the candidate. And my view is that on the day that they're supposed to vote, if any elector didn't vote in the appropriate way, a state party should have the ability to go get an injunction to force that elector to vote that way, given the basis of that pledge. So I think there's been a significant reduction in the risk of these faithless electors, so-called faithless electors. I mean, Jason and I always have to insist, look, our electors were not faithless. Our electors were trying to bring about a democratic result, but the faithless electors are a much less significant risk today, given what the court has done and what private parties have done to back it up.
Thank you. And then I wanted to ask one additional question, since we have such a captive audience, and I think it's important for folks to understand not just how we can elect the president, but some of the mechanics of what we're seeing happening with this election. So can one of you comment on the news that we saw coming out of Wayne County and the canvassing results originally being denied to be certified, and then eventually they were? Can you explain that for people, what that means, and why we're not really super concerned about that potentially for the upcoming electoral vote of the electors?
This is a function of this system that we have, which national popular vote doesn't change, where we don't have a presidential election. We have 51 presidential elections. And then it turns out that in states, we have even more presidential elections because most states delegate to the counties the actual counting and certification of votes. So Michigan has an unusual system, Eileen, where they have these political boards rather than purely administrative boards that are permitted to and even required to certify the votes. And each of these boards is 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And if they don't get 3 votes, it goes uncertified. So it was a really disgraceful act that the Republicans, really without any basis, just decided to not certify from Wayne County. I'm thankful that they reversed. But again, people should know in terms of losing sleep, there are fallbacks after fallbacks because the state board has ultimate authority to certify these votes, even if the counties go somewhat uncertified. And also the Michigan state courts, because this is really only a ministerial act, they could probably order certification as well. And then as Professor Lessig and I, shameless plug, have explained in a detailed 10-part podcast that you can find at the Another Way podcast by searching in your favorite podcast feed. It turns out if all that goes awry, Eileen, then and Congress divides and there's multiple slates of electors out there, whichever slate of electors has the signature of the governor ought to be counted in the event that there's irreconcilable differences. The governor of Michigan is a Democrat, and it's inconceivable that given the 150,000 popular vote margin for Biden, that the Democratic governor won't sign that slate no matter what happens, and that even if Congress is hopelessly divided, that will count.
Thank you very much, Jason. And thank you, Professor Lessig. We're really grateful for both of you to have taken some time and join us today, and to Equal Citizens for co-hosting this event with us. We're grateful to have you as a part of the coalition. So next up, I am going to bring on Michael Steele. Michael Steele is the former chairman of the Republican National Committee and former lieutenant governor of the great state of Maryland. He is a political analyst on MSNBC and is a senior fellow at Brown University's Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be with you, Eileen. It's wonderful to be a part of the conversation. So, voting. Elections. Crazy stuff. I tell you, folks, if you don't appreciate this process after this election, you never will. And I really appreciate the folks who've already gone before to kind of laid out some of the dynamics of where we are. And certainly with respect to the national popular vote, which I think now more than ever will become an important part of the conversation going forward as we look to move into the next political cycle. The dynamics of this one clearly redefine the conversation in many respects. The number of people at the network where I get to hang out, MSNBC, as well as some of my friends over at CNN and even at Fox, sending me texts. So what's going on with this national popular vote? How does that work? And will it play a role in this election cycle? I think there's some really interesting dynamics to sort of touch on very quickly. The first is, of course, the state-by-state winner-take-all process, the methodology that we have right now of awarding electoral votes has created basically, 2 second-place presidents and 2 near misses in the last 6 elections. The reality is that when you go back and look at in 2004, a switch of 59,393 votes in Ohio would have given John Kerry a majority of the Electoral College, despite the fact that George W. Bush had a nationwide lead of over 3 million votes. In 2020, the election we just finished, a switch by 5,495 voters in Arizona, 7,087 in Georgia, and 10,274 in Wisconsin would have defeated Joe Biden in this past election, despite the fact that the president-elect Joe Biden had over 5 million more votes than Donald Trump. In each of these 22,286 voters were 234 times more important than the 5.3 million votes in the other 47 states. That tells you a lot about how this system has been weighted. We have entered, I think, an era in which lawyers and judges in a dozen or so closely divided battleground states are starting to replace the votes, the voice of the voters. We've seen that play itself out very dynamically right now. Recounts are becoming more common in closely divided battleground states, and recounts that are being requested in Georgia and Wisconsin in 2020 sort of demonstrate and illustrate how this process is now less involving the voters, where they're becoming just bit players, and more to looking to, okay, we'll fix it with the recount, we'll fix it with the lawsuits on the back end. There was a recount in Wisconsin in 2016, and requests for recounts in 2016 closely divided Michigan and as we've seen also in Pennsylvania, pull apart the process and creates, I think, and casts more suspicions on the process that ultimately aren't helpful nor healthy. In 2020, there have already been 32 lawsuits, for example, in six closely divided battleground states, and the legal theories that are used, to put it politely, are bizarre. I think at the end of the day, what we're talking about is how the process is moving further and further away from empowering voters and allowing voters to actually speak as to who they prefer in the presidency, and more one in which lawyers and party activists are beginning to take a leading role. Under the national popular vote idea that we have been pushing and supporting, there will be a single national pool of 150 million or so votes, not a dozen or so, not a few thousand here and there in closely held battleground states. There would have been no room for quibbling in this, and certainly in the 4 recent problematic elections, namely, given the margin at which these elections have been called, because the voters would have declaratively stated who they wanted, and the states that would have been a part of that compact would have approved by allocating their electoral votes to those winners. The fact that the presidency is decided by a small number of closely held states and divided at that further facilitates the kind of fraud and the kind of foreign interference that everyone seems to be so concerned about. So how do we begin to mitigate against that? That's what the national popular vote allows us to do, to begin to tighten up the process, because now when I go to vote, I don't have to worry about a lawsuit on the back end. I don't have to worry about someone playing shenanigans. I know my vote is going to go into the bucket, and that bucket is going to get counted, and a winner is going to be determined. So as we see the ongoing exterior and interiors of this election process get exposed and discussed, the national popular vote is going to play an important role in reassessing how we elect a president. Republicans are going to come into this space, I think, with a better understanding now, particularly given what we're seeing happening in a place like Michigan. We know what the contours of a future election could be. We know with the idea of keeping intact the Electoral College, but allowing the states to participate through the compact will afford citizens the opportunity to more directly engage in the process. It will certainly, I think, impact turnout in a very positive way. It will require candidates to not just play in 8 states, but in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and the 7 territories that make up this wonderful republic. That's what we want, right? We want more engagement. We want more citizen involvement. We want to elevate the franchise as much as possible. So we're looking now at a new frontier and a new opportunity, and we're looking at new battleground states, if you will. Every state being a battleground state, where a Republican will spend time in California, a Democrat will spend time in Alabama, because that's where the votes are. That's where the opportunity lies. You're building towards a national total that will get you the Electoral College votes you need to become president. So I really appreciate all the work that the folks at NPV have been doing, the level of engagement, the broadening of the conversation across the country has never been more important. But folks, we're just warming up, baby. We're just starting this. This is the time now where we hunker down and affirmatively make the case, as we saw the citizens do on behalf of NPV in Colorado, as we're seeing legislatures start to do across the country, to look with fresh eyes at the opportunity of empowering citizens to lift their voice up through the national popular vote in a way in which every vote counts, every vote matters. And that's the importance of the work that we're doing right now, the work that you're doing, and we're so grateful for it. Thank you guys very much for all of that energy and excitement. It is making a difference.
Thank you so much, Mr. Steele. Can I ask you to stay on for a moment? We've got a number of questions that I think you would be great to answer.
Sure, happy to.
Thank you. You touched on this a little bit, but I think it's good to give a really direct answer to this. Just what do you say to partisan political actors that are skeptical of the national popular vote as a general idea because they think that the GOP will not be competitive in future presidential elections?
You know, and that's a great question. And I've been battling that question since I was a county chairman here in Prince George's County, Maryland, where I've been outnumbered. I live in a county of about 770,000 people. You know how many registered Republicans we have in this county? About 52,000. So, you know, I get long odds, but we've actually won here. We've elected a Republican to our county council. We have beat back on tax initiatives that we were outgunned in terms of vote, and we were outgunned supposedly with the bottom line numbers. And the difference is, when you make the case, to your constituents, you don't have to worry about how that vote's going to turn, because you're bringing them into the conversation. You're not going to be at a competitive disadvantage. It's not, look, just because the numbers aren't there with you doesn't mean you're going to win, right? How many games have we seen where a team has been down, you know, by 20 points, 30 points, come back and win? It ain't over till it's done. It ain't over till it's over. You got to play through every inning. You got to play through every moment. You got to continue to make the case. And so this idea that the national popular vote somehow will disadvantage you from winning, well, why? How does that work? If you're making the case on policy, if you're making the case on ideas, if you're making the case with good candidates, the national popular vote is your friend, because now you're giving room for more votes to be collected. You're getting an opportunity to get, if you're in California, how many Republicans stay home and don't participate because they think, oh, well, my vote won't matter. Well, it does matter now. It does matter, because you're going to have candidates out there making the case for that vote and showing why their vote does matter. So I don't believe this malarkey, to use a Biden term, that doesn't get you the votes you need to win. I don't believe in that level of strategery, to use a Bush term, that says that you're not going to be as effective. You are, because you're always going to be in a situation as a candidate, a campaign, a party, an organization, to make the case and to move the numbers, to move your vote. And that's what this is all about. It is about voter turnout. It is about voter participation. It is about the direct election that the citizens will have and can enjoy in deciding who will be the leader of the free world. You're not going to stop making the case because of national popular vote. You're going to be making the case more because of the national popular vote.
Thank you. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about how candidates really only spend time in a dozen or so states. And I think that ties in with what you're saying, that we're not running a presidential campaign to win the national popular vote right now, right? So that would shift. When we had a national popular vote, we'd see a completely different campaign ahead of us.
We would. In fact, even Donald Trump said, he said, if the national popular vote were in place in 2016, he would have run a very different campaign. And what did he mean by that? He went on to say, well, I would have gone to places I didn't have to go to, because the focus of the campaign was to play in, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Florida, Nevada. okay? Because Georgia was a foregone conclusion for Republicans. Texas was a foregone conclusion for Republicans. So I'm not going to waste my time in those states. Republicans don't come to Maryland when they're running for president unless they're coming to take cash out of the state. Democrats don't go to California unless they go to take cash out of the state. So the reality that we're now going to create a level playing field where every state, every community within that state, whether it's suburban or urban, whether it's rural or whatever, will now have a competitive advantage in the campaign, because when that candidate shows up, they're not showing up to take money out of your state. They're actually showing up to invest time and votes and money in the state, because that number matters, right? Whether you're a state sitting there with 3 electoral votes or you're sitting there with 57 electoral votes, I need the numbers behind those electoral votes to get those electoral college vote totals. So yeah, it creates a level of competition we haven't seen in our political process, where everybody now, whether you are outnumbered by cows in the West, or you're outnumbered by tall buildings in the heart of inner city America, candidates now recognize that's where the votes are. I've got to go there because I'm building 1, 2, 3 votes at a time. And I love, former State Senator Ray Haynes talks about, being a California senator, in his car on election day, trying to turn out the vote, right? And they call the election on the East Coast at 8 p.m. It's 5 p.m. So now he's got to go try to figure out how to motivate his voters to go to the polls when they've called the election. And why have they called the election? Because whatever candidate has just, gotten the number they need in 8 states. So, an activist in California says, well, I guess I'll just go to dinner. I'm not going to go vote. And they forget to participate. They stop participating. And you're leaving 3-4 million votes on the floor. So this program, this process, this opportunity changes that. The national popular vote changes that, because now it's game on at 5 p.m. in California. Candidates are now shifting and paying attention. How much are we turning out on the West Coast, in Oregon, in Colorado, in California? How is our vote doing? Because we need to find another 2 million votes somewhere to edge towards taking the lead. So this thing matters, and participation will be the order of the day. That is the one thing I love about this more than anything else, is it animates participation, and it forces candidates to do what they should have been doing all along, and that is engaging directly with voters everywhere, every inch of this country, because there is no longer a battleground state when every state is a battleground state.
Thank you. We had one of our speakers earlier mentioned how some individuals that support our movement also support the idea of abolishing the Electoral College. And you mentioned this in your comments. Can you speak to why you support specifically the National Popular Vote Compact as the way to get this done?
Because you don't need to abolish the Electoral College. What this does is it embraces the system as the founders presented it to us. And the founders, in their wisdom, probably didn't even envision something like this, but they created little off-ramps. They created little outlets that you can take. They gave the states the ability to decide how they want to exercise the franchise in their state. They gave them the ability to decide how they wanted to award those electoral college votes that they had. And they created this ability for the citizens to participate without disrupting constitutionally the entire process. So you don't need to abolish the Electoral College. All you have to do is, like we've done with the lottery, like we've done with water rights, like we've done with other things, the states decide, you know what? In order to get our electoral votes, we want you to not only to stand on your 1 foot and pat your head and rub your belly, all right? But in order to do that, you're going to have to do it in this compact, with this compact. We all agree that these are the things that, you're going to have to do. this state's going to say X, that state's going to say Y, that's fine, but we're all in the compact together. So the states agree that whoever wins the national popular vote, however they win it, right? They will get our electoral college votes. And that's just a compact. That's just an arrangement amongst the states. You can stay in it for this cycle. You can get out of it for the next cycle. We don't want you to get out of it because we don't think you will want to once you see how effective it will be in drawing your citizens out to participate, to creating parity amongst the states. And that parity you will see by the dollars that are spent in your state, by the number of times a candidate or his campaign or her campaign shows up in your state. All of these things will contribute to the overall process in a very positive way without having to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Yeah, people have their issues with the Electoral College. Dr. Koza and those who are part of creating this opportunity recognize, wait a minute, we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We don't have to deconstruct the Constitution in order to do this. We can use the mechanisms and the tools that the founders gave us to allow the states to enter into this compact in such a way that they all agree that to get my 10, my 3, my 27, my 15, my 57 electoral college votes, that if you win one more vote than the other gal over there, you get what's in this bucket. And I think that that's a cleaner, more constitutional, more efficient way to do it than having a constitutional convention, or worse yet, running legislation through the Congress and getting the Congress to sign off to abolish the Electoral College and then sending that out to the states. Messy. We don't do messy. We do clean, we do smooth, we do correct. And that's what the founders gave us by allowing us to create this compact.
Thank you so much, Mr. Steele. I know a lot of people that we have on here are wondering how they can speak to their Republican legislators and family members about why this is an issue we can all get behind. So we really appreciate your contributions and your support. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we move on?
No, just to say thanks for the engagement. Go out there and make the case for the national popular vote. This is our window now. We are it was a 79 electoral votes, I believe, away from that magic 270. We survived what they tried to throw at us in Colorado. Look, folks, the momentum is there. We have the nation's attention right now to have this discussion. I know that folks at my network are interested and will be doing more national conversations around that. If you get a chance to participate in it in some way, please do. But let's make that case now. Have the conversation directly with your state legislators. Encourage them to look open-mindedly at this, and don't hesitate to invite the leadership of NPV into your community to have that conversation as well. We're geared up and ready for it because this is the moment. 2024 will be the first time that we will elect through the Electoral College a president by the national popular vote.
We've had several questions come in about how you can get involved and what you can do if you're in a state where national popular vote is already law, but you still want to help. So absolutely, you can help no matter where you are in the country. If you go to nationalpopularvote.com/volunteer, you can sign up there and put in your information. And if you are in a state where the bill is already law, we'll still get you linked in with our national network so that when we have calls to action in states and we need to call 3,000 voters in Virginia and ask them to take action with their legislators, you can help us with that momentum. You can help us by writing letters to the editor, sharing the word about national popular vote with your friends and family. This bill is something that not everyone knows about, and by spreading the word and letting more people know about it, you can really help us, because you never know when you're going to talk to someone that they might say, that's an excellent idea. I need to get on board with that, and turn around and write their legislator. So next up, I am going to bring on Dr. John Koza. Dr. Koza is the chair of National Popular Vote. He's the lead author of the National Popular Vote Compact and the book, Every Vote Equal, a state-based plan for electing the president by national popular vote. He is a former founder and CEO of Scientific Games and is a consulting professor at Stanford University.
Well, thank you, Eileen, and let me thank all the speakers and everyone who took time today to attend this conference to hear about national popular vote. And let me particularly thank Michael Steele for his excellent talk, and Professor Lessig and Jason Harrow explaining the legal issues to us, and Sylvia Bernstein speaking for the League of Women Voters, and Rob Ritchie from Fair Vote, and Pam Wilmot from Common Cause, as well as all the people from Scientific Games. But also in particular, all the volunteers from around the country who pitched in and helped win the Colorado referendum a couple of weeks ago, including the 9,000 people from around the country and in Colorado who stepped up and donated $5.4 million to make national popular vote a reality. So we really appreciate all of this. When we first started national popular vote in 2006, we thought the candidate who got the most votes in all 50 states and DC ought to be president. And we thought that every vote throughout the United States ought to be equal in picking the country's leader. And we also thought that the presidential candidates should have to fashion their platforms, and more importantly, their governing decisions while they served as president, based on the concerns of people in all 50 states, not just the concerns of the people in the dozen or so states that happen to be within a few percentage of one another, where the candidates have regularly concentrated virtually all of their campaign. At the time, we thought the idea of a national popular vote for president was an important and needed improvement, but frankly, I don't think we realized in 2006 how important this issue would become over the years. Perhaps we should all have paid more attention to the 1991 book called Wrong Winner, The Coming Debacle in the Electoral College, because that's really what we've seen unfold in the first 2 decades of this century. We have a system that has produced in 6 elections, 2 second-place winners and 2 near misses, and 2 reasonably smooth elections. That's not a very good average. And I think the coming debacle in the Electoral College is an absolutely apt way to summarize what's been going on for the last 20 years. The debacle was coming, and it's come. Let's talk about, for example, the near miss in 2004, where a few votes in Ohio, every one of those few votes was 26 times more important than the votes of 3 million other people around the country. Now, my family's from Ohio. I've got a lot of friends there and relatives, but I can't figure out why any of those folks in Ohio are smarter or wiser or more entitled or more appropriate to pick the president than folks in Indiana or Illinois or Kentucky or anywhere else, any of the other 30-some states that are regularly ignored in presidential elections. I think this current election, and many people have yet to focus on exactly how near a miss this election was. 22,000 votes scattered in Arizona and Georgia and Wisconsin would have re-elected President Donald Trump, despite the fact that Vice President Biden appears to be going to end up with something like 6 million more votes around the country. That's a 240-some time difference in the value of the vote. We were sitting there watching last Saturday what the vote was going to be in Arizona. We were watching whether the 20,000 dropped to 15 and finally settled in around 12. We're watching just today the recount that ended in Georgia, where a 14,000 margin was shrinking. It's now shrunk, I believe, to about 12,000 or 13,000. And similarly, there's a recount about to start in Wisconsin, where there's a 20,000 vote margin. Well, I used to live in Georgia. I have friends there too, but they're not smarter or wiser than any of the rest of us. And there's no reason, frankly, why we should care who carries Georgia by 12,000 votes. Why should we care who carries Arizona by 12,000 votes? Why should we give voters in this handful of closely divided battleground states control over the presidency? There are 50 states in the United States, plus the District of Columbia, that can vote for president. But the reality is that the presidential election is concentrated, as Rob Ritchie from FairVote showed us earlier today, consistently in just 12 closely divided battleground states. There's just absolutely no reason for that. But it's really getting worse. It's getting worse because now that we look forward, we can see that the nature of presidential campaigning has changed. Because of social media and more sophisticated politics, it's possible for a presidential candidate, such as President Trump, to discern a narrow vein of voters running through 3 states, say Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and exploit that narrow strip of voters in a way that was never technologically possible in the past, and to produce a frankly surprise result where those states were narrowly carried by a total of something like 78,000 votes. The votes in those states, those 78,000 votes, were all 20 sometimes more important than the votes of most of the people at this conference, and in fact, most of the people in the United States. But this year it's gotten even worse. Not only have we had the second near miss election in 2 decades, but the rules of the game changed. It used to be candidates who lost looked around for a place to recount, maybe a Florida where the margin was only 437 votes, or some other state where the margin was close enough that you could expect to overturn the results by recounting the votes and hoping to find some small mistake. That game has changed. It's changed permanently in this election. The election is no longer about counting votes or recounting votes. It's about creating a bunch of hair-splitting legal issues whereby you can throw out tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of votes based on bizarre legal theories of and details of how officials may or may not have conducted the election. That, unfortunately, cat is out of the bag. And it's apparent for everyone to see that because of the winner-take-all system, this business of zeroing out the losing voters in each state and giving 100% of the electoral votes to the winners, this winner-take-all process is creating a totally unstable system where elections in 2024, if they continue under this current system, will not even be about winning the 12 battleground states, because even the 12 battleground states are going to be disenfranchised by hair-splitting lawyers and meddling courts that are attempting to take away the voice of the people, even of the 12 states where the people have a voice. So let me say this. I am worried about American democracy. My mother's family got out of Germany just before the Nazis took over. My father's family, all but one, got out of Russia before the communists took over. The United States is not entitled to a democracy. It has to protect it and preserve it year after year. A coup can happen here. There is nothing at all about the United States that prevents from what's happening here, what's happened in so many countries. And what we've seen in this election is a complete perversion of the election process, where instead of the people deciding, or even 1/4 of the people deciding in a handful of battleground states, we're headed towards a system where the hair-splitting lawyers and the courts are going to take over and decide who's to be elected. So what we need to do is pass national popular vote by 2024. It can be done. It should be done. And with your help, if you get on this cause and consistently pursue it, we can convince the 7,400 state legislators, or enough of them in the United States, that they should exercise their power under Article 2, Section 1, and change the method by which they award their electoral votes to a national popular vote, so that the candidate who gets the most popular votes in all 50 states in the District of Columbia will always become president. Thank you very much, Eileen.
Thank you, Dr. Koza. If you want to stay on for a moment, I think that there's one question that's come up several times that I think it would be really good for you to answer. Questions about, honestly, the basic policy choice that national popular vote presents. Some people saying, well, if my state passes this bill, potentially North Carolina could go for the one candidate, but the national popular vote would go for the other candidate, and how that it would make people in the state feel. So can you elaborate on that policy choice?
Well, that is the essence of the policy choice, whether you want a state-by-state election where the 45% or the 49% of the voters in a given state are zeroed out totally and have no voice, or an election where every individual voter gets to vote for their choice for president and have their choice for president directly counted in the tally for their choice for president. Now, you can't have it both ways. You can't say that Virginia voted for Hillary Clinton. Isn't that wonderful? 13 electors went up to Richmond on December 19th, and these party functionaries got to cast 13 votes for Hillary Clinton. But what was more important was those 13 unknown individuals going up to Richmond, or was it who went to the White House for 4 years? And that's the essence of the choice. If you want a national popular vote for president, where every person's vote is equal throughout the United States, where the candidate who gets the most votes is guaranteed to win the White House, and where there will be a campaign in all 50 states, because the voters in every single congressional district of the United States are just important as the ones in any other congressional district. So there won't be this situation where the candidates concentrate on a handful of states. If you want those three things, the way to get it is national popular vote. If you're concerned about which 13 anonymous people show up in Richmond on December 14th this year, then you probably like the current system. I don't.
Thank you very much, Dr. Koza. So we're right at the end of our allotted time. So I'm going to go ahead and close out our webinar now. I want to thank again our coalition partners that co-hosted this event with us. Fair Vote, Equal Citizens, Common Cause, and the League of Women Voters. We're really grateful to have you as partners in our effort to change the way we elect the president so that every vote is equal and the presidency is guaranteed to the candidate who gets the most votes for the first time in our nation's history. Thank you to everyone who has joined and tuned in. Please note that if you have more questions, our website has a lot of resources. So nationalpopularvote.com, and specifically if you look at the Answering Myths section of our website, it's designed to answer the questions that we get most common. So if we didn't get a chance to answer your question, I apologize. It looks like we got close to 400, so I'm sorry if we didn't get to yours, but please do know that all the answers to the most common questions are online. We really appreciate you taking the time, and we hope that you'll join our movement. If you want to get involved in your state or help from anywhere across the country, you can do so at nationalpopularvote.com/volunteer. And absolutely, the most important thing that you can do after this seminar is immediately go to nationalpopularvote.com/write, W-R-I-T-E. Put in your zip code and write your state legislator and let them know that this is an issue that's important to you. Because State legislators need to hear from their constituents about this so that they know it's a critical issue to you. And together, we are going to change the way America elects the president for the better. The help from everyone on here and everyone across the country. So thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.